Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, as you can tell by the title, we are going to be discussing another audiophile label. My last two classical videos were on living stereo and basically analog productions. Then I talked about some newer labels like Tatsin and Chasing the Dragon, and today I'm going back to one of these audiophile reissue labels that reissues classical records from another time period, mainly the 50s and 60s. And that is Speaker's Corner. Now, Speaker's Corner is an audiophile, all-analog company based in Germany. And they have a lot of focuses. They have a lot of rock records. They have jazz records. And they also have a lot of classical records. And unlike Analog Productions and Mobile Fidelity and some other big audiophile labels, they don't work with one or a few mastering engineers or people that cut the records. So Mobile Fidelity is mainly Krieg Wunderlich, and Analog Productions is Ryan Smith, sometimes Kevin Gray, Bernie Grunman, a slew of them. Speaker's Corner has a lot of outsourcing, I'll say. I'm not sure if that's entirely correct. Maybe they're in-house or not, but generally they have a lot of different mastering engineers working for them. And that can be good, and that can be bad, and that can be ugly, as seen in the title of this video. So today I'm going to be focusing on classical records, and I'm just going to kind of give my 2 cents on this audiophile reissue label, what they're really good at, some things that they're not so good at, and some things that I really think are quite bad, the ugly. So first, I'll start off with the good. They focus a lot on a few labels, mainly Decca. Now, the Decca catalog is one of the best sounding catalogs from the late 50s and early 60s into the 70s even of classical music ever. In their heydays in the late 50s and early 60s, they were on par, maybe slightly worse than the living stereos that were coming out at that time, but still fantastic. I mean, Living Stereo and Decca even had a partnership at one point to make RCA Decca titles that are some of the best sounding records ever. I talked about those in my first video, so you should check that video out. But they covered a lot of Decca. They did Mercury records, they did some Columbia records, they did a lot of Deutsche Grammophon, and they did some other smaller companies like Westminster. So I thought I would start off with some great sounding records from their catalog, namely the ones from the late 50s and early 60s. For example, this one, Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. This is on Decca, as you can see. And this is on, I don't know if this is the official name, but I call it the Triangle Decca logo. The main determinant of one of these earlier pressings is what is known as a wideband. And so that's just denoted by a relatively wide band, as opposed to a narrow band, which looks like this. So a narrow band and a wide band. So, as you can see, this one is titled SXL 2009. Decca had an SXL, which is the stereo. They also had monos, but this one's stereo, so SXL. And they started with 2001. So this is one of the earlier pressings. 2009. And then I'll also have this one, Peer Gynt Grieg SXL 2012. So these big triangle logos that do not have a box around them, these are some of the earliest Deccas, and they sound absolutely fantastic. This Berlioz, conducted by Argenta, was performed in, I believe, it doesn't say it directly on the label here, but I believe it was 58, and so was Peer Gynt. They sound absolutely incredible. Such good dynamics, such good space, such a deep sound stage. They sound different from living stereos. They do. This is the way that they were recorded, I guess. The process of the mastering. A lot of different factors, obviously, at that time, but still really, really good sounding. Some of them definitely on par with some of the best sounding living stereos. So, Symphonie Fantastique, one of the best symphonies, in my opinion, ever. Top 10. If I could say 9 symphonies that were the best, I would give, or 10 symphonies that were the best, 9 would go to Beethoven, 1 would go to Berlioz. I'm just kidding, but a really, really good Symphony, and definitely a must-have. Peer Gynt as well. You know, whenever someone comes over and I want to show them my stereo, which by the way I'll include in the description down below, just so that you don't think I'm spitting facts with absolutely no, credibility. I'll describe what my system is. It's a mid-range system, definitely, but I think that I can definitely discern a lot of the differences between a lot of these records. Every single time someone comes over and I show them the power of vinyl or something, I always play them In the Hall, The Mountain King, at the end of side one on this one. Everyone knows it, it's a great tune. This one also sounds great. Then we get into a few of the later triangle decas here. This is Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto 1, performed by Curzon with the Vienna Phil and conducted by Schulte. This one is also on a wideband. The widebands went on throughout most of the 60s, and I believe that they really only switched to the narrow bands in the early 70s. So this one is still the triangle, but it has a box around it, and you can see that the number is later, SXL 2114. It still sounds fantastic. I can't say it sounds better or worse than the other ones. It's a different style of recording. I have a few more of these triangle decas, and it's really a case-to-case basis, but I can definitely assure you that if you are buying a Speaker's Corner record and you see this little triangle here, that you're definitely getting a good one. You're getting an early deca, which is one of the best sounding decas. Another one, which is great, these are all symphonic pieces. If you're kind of more into that quartet or quintet style, less instruments, I recommend Schubert's Trout Quintet, one of the most popular quintets, probably the most popular quintet ever written, and still, again, on the wideband label, and this one's SXL 2110. Again, triangle with the box logo around it. That one sounds fantastic. Now, when Decca got into the 70s, and this Living Stereo was already done at this point, right? Living Stereo ended in 63, and then RCA just went down in quality. Their records just didn't have any of the same charm that they had up until then. Decca kept it up. They really made their records still sound great. At a notch lower, unfortunately, but that's the way that music and audiophile music developed throughout the later 60s and 70s. Eventually, Decca switched to the boxed Decca logo, the more common Decca logo that you might see on some Rolling Stones records and those rock bands of the sort, and here we have a narrow band instead. This one is Holst's The Planets. This is, I think, one of the better sounding narrow band records. If you're buying from Speaker's Corner, I would definitely go for the earlier decas. I would definitely go for the ones that were recorded in 58 and 60 for one reason and one reason only. Originals are impossible to come across. The vinyl wasn't that great in general. I guess multiple reasons, actually. The vinyl wasn't great in general. They're pretty costly now, especially some of the more popular pieces like Tchaikovsky's Pathétique. There's a really good triangle one that Speaker's Corner didn't reissue, I don't believe. And yeah, very expensive to find. And these ones, I'm assuming, just sound better. But these narrow bands, what's great about these narrow bands is they're from the 70s. So you can go to a store and pick them up for $5. Most of the classical records that I have in my collection are Decca narrow bands. Now, I'll give like a little bit of a side note for the North American viewers here. Decca was solely in the UK, so Decca Records, that's where they were being sold as. That was the name Decca. In North America, the name wasn't Decca, it was London. So if you have some, again, Rolling Stones records, you might see, if they were from the US, that they'll say London on them. If you see a London record, a narrow band usually, you're usually going to find narrow bands. It's hard to find wide bands these days. From the 70s, and it's London, and it says somewhere on the label, Made in England. It's made in England. It is the exact same stamper as the Deccas. So, if you're in North America and you want to find $5 great sounding classical pressings, they're usually, you find them everywhere. I probably have like 30 at least in my collection. $5 that they say made in England. If they say made in USA on the London label, do not get it. They do not sound good. They have to say London, made in England. London Records, made in England. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't really go for these box decas that much, is because you can find really great sounding. And I have to say that they sound different. You know, maybe I won't say they sound better, but they have a different, they kind of have that warmer analog sound to them. And I know that these are all analog, but I find that the strings on these box decas, in general, this is a trend I've noticed after having, like, I don't know, 10, 15 of the Speaker Corner reissued ones. They are kind of more, I don't know, I don't want to say metallic, but they're kind of rougher around the edges. They're not as smooth as you want, like as the earlier triangle decas or the living stereos and things like that. So that's enough of that rant. That's a little bit of just information on the triangle decas, which I think you should get the Speaker's Corner for. And then the narrowband decas, which you can get the Speaker's Corner if you want, if you really want that piece, for example, but you can, you know, find them in the wild, original Londons and decas narrowband, depending on where you live. They also did a few more labels, as I said, so I really like their Mercury catalog that they did. So this is the, you know, the Starker Bach Cello Suites box set, 3 LPs on Mercury. They did a lot of Mercury Living Presence, which is the equivalent of that triangle deca, that living stereo, so the late 50s, early 60s, but Mercury. They sound fantastic. I know there's a, I didn't bring it out, but Daphne and Chloe by Ravel. Or is it WC? I forget. But anyways, the one with Daphne and Chloe sounds fantastic. This box, I know, I've heard that the Analog Productions 45 box sounds better than this one. I do not own it. I would like to get it when it gets restocked, and then, I don't know, maybe sell this one. So if that ever gets restocked and you want a box set of this, let me know. I might sell it to you. So that's the good of Speaker's Corner. They make a lot of records. They have a lot of classical. They have definitely, I think they have a bigger classical catalog than what Analog Productions has. And Analog Productions really only focused on living stereo. They didn't have a multitude of things. So you can get a lot of Speaker's Corner, Deutsche Grammophones, decas, and the works. So that's the good part of them. Now I'm going to show you some of the bad. And one record I would like to particularly show is this one. This is Columbia. It is a Speaker's Corner of Tchaikovsky's Pathétique, Symphony 6, conducted by Dimitri Mitropoulos on the Columbia 6i. And so this was the, again, the equivalent of a Mercury Living Presence, a Decca Triangle, an RCA Living Stereo, a late 50s, early 60s rendition of these classical records. Was on 6i. So you can see, count the 6 Columbia eyes on the side there. I've always wanted a pressing of Tchaikovsky 6. This was the first one that I got about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It sounds absolutely horrendous. I don't know what is wrong with this record. It is just pure treble, no warmth. The bass sounds like a viola is playing. You know, or the cellos sound like violas are playing. The violas sound like violins, and the violins are shrill and shrieky. It's horrible. I do not know what they did with this record. As soon as I heard the first side of this, I couldn't handle it anymore, and I went out searching for another Pathétique symphony, which luckily enough I did find. Out of curiosity, if you would like a really good sounding pressing of Pathétique, look for the King Super Analog, which is a Japanese company, pressing of the Decca version, which I believe is conducted by, I'm not sure, I'll put it in the description below once I check, but it's the early Decca, like 58 pressing. But this one sounds horrible. This one doesn't sound as bad. It sounds decent, but it just doesn't really live up to, you know, like the price that you're paying. I would just like to point out as well that Speaker's Corner records are relatively cheaper than Analog Productions. They used to be about 30 bucks. Recently, I think the prices have kind of rised, unfortunately, but they're still cheaper than Analog Productions, which sells a lot of their 45s. I mean, their 33s are 40 USD, and then their 45s are 60 USD, so a little steep in my opinion. Speaker's Corner was really good for a while because of their cheap prices, but you know, sometimes you don't get the quality that you're paying for, and I think that that was the case with this one. I still think it sounds okay. This is Westminster Hi-Fi, which is also a late 50s, early 60s label, and it's Beethoven's Eroica, conducted by Hermann Scherchen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is what the label looks like. I have the Bruno Walter Columbia, which was done by Bernie Grundman with Classic Records in the 2000s. I think that one sounds absolutely fantastic, phenomenal. This one just doesn't really live up to it. I'm also not really a fan of the way that it's played, maybe because I'm just so used to the other versions. But, you know, you win some and you lose some with Speaker's Corner, I'll say. With Analog Productions, you can be sure that you're getting a fantastic record. It's going to sound great. They're only picking records that sound great, that are audiophile records. Speaker's Corner, on the other hand, kind of reissues based off of audiophile interest, but also for the music, which is great as well. So if you really like an interpretation, or you really like a piece that Analog Productions just hasn't done because maybe it just might not sound that great, Speaker's Corner might be the way to go for that sense. Now I'll talk about the ugly. The main problem that I have with Speaker's Corner is I think that their quality control is just not great. It is not up to par with some of the other companies out there. And I know it's hard to produce records. You know, it's easy to make one record, but it's hard to make 1,000 records. But, you know, they're just quality control. I've noticed a lot of records. The extent of the bad quality control was noisy vinyl, some crackling, especially on the Symphony Fantastique Argenta. This copy I got was a bit noisy. It's not too big a deal. It goes away after the first few minutes on the first side, but you know, you're listening to classical. A lot of classical is very quiet. You know, I would be super pissed if I got a Mahler symphony or something, and that was just, you know, crackling galore. You know, maybe Beethoven or something might be a bit easier if you're not listening to the slow movement, but you know, it's a bit annoying. And I was okay with that. That was fine with me to an extent, you know. I'm buying these records in Canada, so I can't really return them when I'm buying them online. And it's a little disappointing. And in my hunt for Pathétique, I bought the Speaker's Corner Deutsche Grammophon pressing. And this is what I got. I don't know how well this shows up, but there is an absolutely humongous scratch that goes across the side. Also, here, the vinyl was not cut properly on the side. It looks like someone just took a claw or something and just completely scratched the living hell out of this first side. It's completely, I didn't even want to play it. I put it on for like maybe a second and just took it off immediately because it's unlistenable. It's a completely broken record. And unfortunately, I bought this over Music Direct. And, you know, I could send it back and get my money back, but I would have to pay for shipping, which I paid for it to get here, and then I would have to pay for it to send it back. And then if I wanted a replacement, I would have to pay shipping again. So, you know, I don't really feel like paying $150 for this one record. I think it sounds okay. So if you do want to get it, it sounds okay. I don't think that your pressing is going to be like mine, but that's just something to really show the ugly of Speaker's Corner. So I won't really go on any further. I think that I've covered this in a lot of detail. I might go over the Decca catalog in future videos again, and really maybe go over some more specific titles with Speaker's Corner, maybe talk about those narrowband Londons. Let me know what you all think. I haven't uploaded a video in a while, but I saw that my channel was getting traction these past few weeks, so I thought that I would start it up again. And yeah, please let me know if you want to see any more content like this. I have a lot of classical records. That's the main part of my collection, really. I love listening to classical music, and I love really finding what the best pressings are, because not a lot of people really talk about that. So if you do have any suggestions, please let me know, and thank you for watching.